Hi everybody, and welcome to the first video in this Introduction to Microsoft Excel series. It's just some general housekeeping things to kind of get started. Things we're going to cover. So we're going to talk about basic layout, some cursor shapes, which really sort of causes people problems early when they're trying to learn Excel because they're trying to go too fast and they don't realize that the shape of their cursor while they're moving around is very important. We'll do some basic maneuvering and then some formatting to hopefully kind of to end things off and get you introduced. A couple things. So first, I'm working with this NCAA sports revenue data. If you like, you should be able to go down into the description and there's a folder where you can go pull up this data and you can follow along. I think that's the best way to learn. So please go through and do that. Second, you'll notice that I'm going to use a combination in this video of keyboard shortcuts, which I'll introduce you to, and a mouse. I highly recommend that you get a mouse, just because that combination, you can do it with just a mouse and no keyboard, or a keyboard and no mouse. But really, the combo using both can make things so much more effective, especially adding the mouse, because then right click is consistent across whether it's a PC or a Mac, where it can be a little bit different based upon which operating system you have if you're just trying to use the trackpad. Plus the trackpad just in general is very slow. So please invest in even a cheap one, like a $5-10 one. Will really make your life a lot better, and learning these programs and utilizing them a lot more efficient. Second thing, make sure you're working along with me in full screen. I am working on a PC, but you'll notice if you go a little smaller, things up here sort of condense based upon where you're at. And so if you're trying to watch this on half the screen, you might be like, I don't see that button, Gray. Like, where is it? It's because your screen is too small. So please take some time here and try and work in full screen if you can. Please note that I am also working on a PC. I will throughout try and mention the various differences that I see across Macs and PCs, especially with the keyboard shortcuts. Most of them are very similar with a slight twist for the Mac people. Note that you might see things that look in a little bit different order. Most of it is pretty intuitive, so that while it might not look exactly the same, it's close enough to where it's like, oh, that's got to be it. So please try and follow along that way as you kind of go through. And yeah, so let's kind of get started here. So welcome, and we'll kind of just start with just a basic layout. So a lot of people will just want to get into a program and get their hands dirty and kind of keep moving along, which is fine, but it can make the learning process a lot harder. So let's just take maybe 2 or 3 minutes and kind of review Excel here. But it's nice once you go through one of the Microsoft programs, whether it's Excel, PowerPoint, Word, we have videos on all those things. They're pretty consistent. What's in each is going to differ a little based upon what the program does, but the layout is kind of the same. So always across the top, you have these sort of common ribbons or tabs that you want to think through. Where I spend most of my time, honestly, is the Home tab. It's got most of the things we want to do. As you get a little bit more advanced in Excel, so later on in the videos that we do, you'll leverage things like pivot tables and charts that are on the insert. You can mess around with the page format. Look at how much it is to print. If you're still kind of figuring out what all Excel can do, the formulas bar is pretty nice. The data tab, you'll see this one in the other videos as well, getting a little bit more advanced. And some things you do, whether it's here or other Microsoft programs, like other toolbars can appear. Like I know, for instance, if I inserted maybe an equation, you'll note that another toolbar appears where it's just focused on that. And I'm going to undo this because we don't need it for this one, but just kind of keep that in mind. And so I'm going to keep on the Home tab here because for this video, it's going to be kind of everything that we need. But just note that a lot of the things are kind of spread out that way. So general overview of what Excel is set up as, and I'm going to zoom in so you can either hold control or command if you're on a Mac and use your mouse ball to roll forward. You also can down here on the bottom right, you have this minus or plus, but I'll zoom in so we kind of are on the same page. So how Excel is set up, so all of the columns have letters and then all of the rows have numbers. And so it's sort of a coordinate system later on that we'll talk about when we're using formulas and things like that. What we're currently working on, or when I'm clicked in one of these spots, technically called a cell, and this whole area here is called a sheet. You can have multiple worksheets, so you can see down here in the bottom left, here are all the sheets for this one. So there's a data overview. Looks like we have some schools and sports. We have some expenses data, some revenue data, and you can always include another one. So all you got to do is go down to this plus, and I'm just hovering, and it tells you what it is. Oh, new sheet. Okay, let's do that. Let's click that. And then it comes with a generic name. You can always right-click, or I believe if you double-click, it'll highlight and let you rename it. I like to right-click and then just do rename. And we'll do this like, maybe we'll say intro tutorial, something like that. And we'll come back to this as we go through. All right, so hopefully nothing too crazy there. And there are ways that you can link up all of these sheets onto one sheet. Again, that'll be in more of an advanced video, but just knowing that you can kind of do that and that your data can be spread across those general things. All right, so that's kind of the layout sort of overview. Let's talk about cursor shape. So my cursor is probably a lot bigger than yours, but I did that so that it's easy for us to see how it changes, because again, it is very, very important, not just in Microsoft programs in general, but really in Excel, because there are a lot of different ones. So first, the standard one is just this sort of white cross. And it's just saying, all right, this is where you can kind of click on things. If you go up to the tab, it should shift to an arrow key, something like that. And then, so it always kind of starts with the normal. And then once you click on something, right, that's just a location. If you then want to click inside of this, so let's say I wanted to see, so note how it's all cut off and things like that. If I wanted to see everything, you can double click. And now it changes to an I format. It's called the I beam, right? If you see this big I, and that means you're going to be typing within this cell. All right, so a lot of students will get in here and they'll double click and they'll try and copy things from here, but they haven't sort of done anything. And so if you want to copy the entire contents of a cell, one, the most important thing you can learn in Excel is sort of escape. So when you do escape, the cell reverts back to what you were doing before, right? As long as you don't hit enter, it should be fine. So like if I somehow went in here and I deleted this, I was like, oh, I didn't want to do that. If you just hit escape, it sort of undoes. And so, but once you do that, then you're kind of writing in there. So kind of going through and doing that. For the next one, so resizing rows and columns, it doesn't really make sense to do it here. So let's go to the schools and sports tab. And you'll notice across, and a lot of data sets are like this, like the titles sometimes get cut off. Like, so if I'm clicking here, and I'll let me zoom in, I can look up in what we call the formula bar, and it says sports offered. But when I'm just looking at it, it doesn't do anything, right? And so, well, what if I wanted to size it so I could see everything? Well, there's a couple different ways, and just like Excel, there are literally hundreds of ways to probably do something. Your job is really to figure out what's best, what's fastest, what's most efficient. And so the long way is, if I did one at a time, I would go up on top of the letter. You'll know the cursor will change now to a black sort of down arrow key. That's if I wanted to select this whole column. So I'm going to. So I'm going to select the whole column. And then again, hover over to the right, and you should see your cursor change again as you get close to this boundary between the letters. Right? If you then click and drag, you can or you can manually figure out, all right, what spacing you really like, which could be fine, but a nice thing that it has is if, again, you go, instead of click and drag, just double click. What double clicking does is it auto formats to the widest, right? So right here, you don't actually even have to do the select. right? You can just go hover and then it changes and you're near the border and you double click and it does it. So it goes to the widest one in there. Same thing like school. Notice it doesn't just have to be the title down here, right? Well, it looks like it's just university. Well, really in that whole cell is Alabama Tuscaloosa. So I could manually try and figure it out, right? But when you do that, maybe what if I have something later that it's cut off? So as I scroll down, oh, there is actually one. So I like to honestly manually do it by just go between here and double click, and then it auto formats to the widest piece. Now, let's say you had a bunch of columns, like, I don't know, let's go to the expenses one. And you're like, I really don't want to manually do this for all of them. You don't have to. So what I generally will do is up in the top left corner, right, you see this sort of half squarish, so square with half gray box. If you click on that, it will select all of the data. And then what you can do is go between any of these. Doesn't matter, right? I'll go between N and O and then double click, and it auto formats every single one so that you can see all of the things in it. And so you notice that I'm kind of scrolling down across my left here. I'm going to undo this because other ways to do it is maybe you don't want to do them all. Maybe I just want like these 3. Well, again, you can just click on D and drag across. And then again, anywhere, doesn't really matter. You just double click and it only fits those 3. So it's entirely up to you. Again, I typically like to just go select all and then anywhere in here, doesn't matter, double click so it fits sort of a little bit nicer. The same concept works with the rows. So I'll go to school sports, and I don't nearly use this as often for rows, but you'll notice the 2 shapes are consistent. So along the left-hand side, I've got the normal arrow. So if I want to select the whole row, I can. But again, if for some reason, maybe, and then I'll move it, like maybe you have some weird line like this, I can't even see that. Well, again, you can go to the border and manually drag when that thing changes, or I'll undo here. I can just, again, double click and it will auto fit that. And when you do all like this, it's going to do it for you, which is really, really nice. And so I think it's very, very useful. So again, cursor shapes are very important as you kind of go through there. There's 2 other ones that we want to kind of can use and be careful with. I'm going to just show you one to where it's like directional and you can move things. I see this happen, honestly, on accident when a lot of students are doing it, but I'm going to go up to the letter B here, and I'm going to right click and insert, so it just inserts a column. And let's say I wanted to move this just one observation over here. Again, I don't know why you would do that, but notice as I'm hovered after I click on it, as I'm towards the middle, it stays normal. But if you go to the top, the bottom, the far right, or the far left, the cursor again changes. Now it's kind of 4 arrows, and you can use this 2 ways. One, you can use it to navigate data. So if you were to go to the bottom and double click, it will go all the way to the bottom of your data or until it hits a blank cell. Same thing, if I wanted to go to the top, I would go here and double click. And we do want to be careful, and I'll show you what I mean by blank. So notice in this first row, right, there's a blank right here. So it's going to stop here if I do the right side. So I go over to the right, the cursor changes, and I can double click. And it just goes all the way over there. All right, so you can do the same thing. I'm going to have to scroll over to see it. If I went to the left, it's only going to go left 1 because there's a bunch of blanks. Another way you can do this or use this is instead of double clicking, if you get the cursor to change and then click and drag, you can put this wherever you want. So it's kind of like cutting it. So you can cut and paste. So it moves it all the way over. Note that it looks like it overlaps these 2 cells, but if I click here, note that there's nothing in there, right? It'll go and show out there. I'm going to undo this. You can do the same thing with columns. All right, so if I select the whole column, and then anywhere in here, I should be able to see the bottom. I don't think it works here. It should be left or bottom here, which is actually kind of the top, or the right. Doesn't really matter. I'll do the left. If you want to click and drag, it'll move the whole column over. All right, so maybe this is something where you're like, I really want to format. Be careful if you try and drop it on top because it will delete the other column, just like cutting and pasting. So you want to make sure that you put it over somewhere that it doesn't overlap any of the other data. So that's pretty nifty. And again, a lot of times I just see that happen by accident because people try and click and they're like, oh, it just happened. And a lot of it is something like that. So I'm going to go ahead and maybe delete this column so it's back to kind of normal. And the last one is going to be to fill cells. So more advanced uses of formulas are going to be talked about in later videos. But I do want to show you one here because, again, a lot of students sort of struggle with this. And it doesn't really make sense. I'm going to make a variable for us. So let's do, I don't know, let's go to the revenue tab. And then I'll zoom in a little. Then I'm going to go to the far right. So this far right is, and I'm going to bold it, is total operating revenue. And let's see, I'll go ahead and fit it. And row O is royalties, licensing, advertising, and sponsorship. So let's say I want to create a variable. And again, we'll do more advanced versions of this in later videos, but I can at least show you here. So let's say I wanted to create like a percent of total revenue that are royalties, something like that. So you can title this whatever you want. A couple ways to start typing. You can just click on it and start typing. So I could say like percent revenue from, let's say, I'll just say royalties. I would probably spend a lot of time on this if I was redoing it, but I'll do that. Or you can just click in and double click and then start typing from there and get in the eye. It doesn't really matter. And so I'll bold this. And so if I wanted to do that, all I'm going to do is I'm going to take the total amount from royalties divided by the total revenue. So I would just do equals. That's how we tell Excel, hey, I need you to work as kind of a calculator for me. And so I'll click on the first one, right, this first royalty. So notice how it's referenced it, O2. So it's saying column 0, number or row 2. And I like that it color codes it, and you could say divided by, and then total operating revenue. Note, I wouldn't ever type the numbers in manually because let's say I want to do this, and what I really want to do is for the other 99 schools. So I'll hit enter, and I have it. And if you ever like or forget or anything like that, you can always double click back in it and see where it's referencing. This helps when you've gone a long time without looking at a data set. And you get back into it. I do it kind of all the time. So I'm going to hit escape. And so you'll notice, and it might be hard to see. Let me see if I can zoom in a little more. I'm way in here, I think 210. It doesn't really get any bigger. But if you go to the very bottom right corner, if you just look at it, you'll notice that there's a little square there. And if you want to then drag this formula down, again, the long way would be just to click and drag, right? I'm going to do like this, something like here. I notice that you always want to make sure it works, and so I'm going to zoom out just a little so we can see all our data. I'll double click and know that it's saying, okay, for this school, it's dividing their royalties divided by their total revenue, which is really nice. And then I'll hit escape to kind of get out of there, and I'll unzoom a little. And rather than doing this all the way down, you'll notice as you hover over that bottom right corner, you now have a black four-way cross. As long as it's next to other data, so this is right next to this data, what you can do is click on that cell and you can double click. And it will do all the way until it either runs into a blank or it's at the very bottom of the data. So it did it for us. And it's not a major deal when we have 100 observations, but a lot of times, especially now with the world and data, you're working with thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, sometimes even millions of observations. And so you definitely don't want to drag for that long, especially if you're trying to work along with a trackpad. That's going to take you forever. So try and do that and make your life a little bit easier. Another way to kind of show that is, let's go to that new tab that we created. Excel is smart, and so it knows kind of numbers and orders. So let's just say like numbers, and I'm going to do a fun one. I like months, something like that. And so let's say I did 1, 2, 3. Excel is like, I bet you were counting up by 1. So if you clicked on this bottom cell, and again, bottom right corner, right? You have the cross, you can drag down, and right, if you're just doing the 3, it's like, well, keep doing 3. I guess that's all you want. But if I, again, undo, if I select all 3, it's like, I can spot an order, I bet, right? If you drag down, it gives you a preview. I'm going to put a 4, 5, 6, 7. So it automatically counts for you. And I know there's 12 months, so I'm just going to drag down to 12. And there's no way to auto-fill that. So if I undid this and double-clicked, it doesn't do anything. It's like, I don't really think you want to go down to the very bottom capabilities of Excel. So when you're first doing it, yeah, you kind of want to do that. But then, let's say I did January, February, March. I've never done the shorthand, but I could click on March and start dragging. And it's smart enough to know, like, even if I don't select the other 3, like, I bet you want April, then May, then June, then July, right? It does it for us. And this one, because it now has a reference on like where to stop, you could then just go to the bottom right corner, double click, and it does it. And so it is very, very smart for finance people. It does well with quarters 1. So you could do like quarter 1, quarter 2, and then it's gonna know. I don't think you have to do, yeah, right? So quarter 4, quarter 1, it starts over again. So like auto does that. And again, you could just double click and it counts up. So it's a very, very nice feature. Again, the big key thing is you got to get to that bottom right corner where that black cursor, that black cross cursor kind of shows up. All right, it's end of the sort of second section. Let's talk a little bit about maneuvering. So working around in data that may be sort of a lot of either horizontal or vertical or both. So general navigation. So for some keyboard shortcuts, again, you can use a trackpad, you can use your mouse, but if you're using hundreds of thousands of observations and you really want to go quickly to the top or quickly to the bottom, you need to get comfortable using Control and the arrow keys, and for highlighting, Control and Shift, the arrow keys. If you're on a Mac, instead of Control, please hit Command. And so if I wanted to go all the way to the right, instead of having to like hover over and double click, what you can do is hold Control and then do the right arrow key. And you'll note it goes all the way, not to the end, but to the first blank. And so that's sort of a nice thing. Same thing, like let's say I want to go back. I'm going to do Control back. If I want to go all the way to the bottom or the first blank that it finds, Control down arrow key. All right, so you can do Control right, up, and then notice here, again, it always stops at a blank. You always want to be careful with that. If you ever need a whole row, you may not want to use Control. You may just want to click up again on the letter, or if you want the whole row, on the number. But it can really help. So I'm going to do Control back, Control up. And I'm going to leverage those. And again, if you're on a Mac, it's Command. Let's say you wanted to highlight everything at the same time. Well, it's easy. You hold Control, or again, if you're on a Mac, Command, and then hold Shift as well, and then do the down arrow key. Now I've highlighted all of this. So if I wanted all the school names, I could then do that, and then Control or Command C, or right click and copy, something like that. And you can move them onto a new sheet if you really wanted to. Excuse me. All right, so that's really nice. If for some reason you didn't want to highlight them all, so one thing some students freak out is they're like, oh gosh, like what do these lines mean? It just means it's copy or cut. Again, you can just hit escape and they go away. But I'm going to go to the top, Control up or Command up. And then let's say I want to highlight everyone again. So I'm going to do, or only the schools here. I'm going to do Control Shift down or Command Shift down. And let's say I didn't want that last observation, Penn State. Well, instead of holding Control, which will take you as far as you need to go, or the first blank in any direction, just hold Shift. All right, so if you just hold Shift and then the arrow key, right, then it'll let you go up. So I'm just doing up, 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 down, right, down, or down, 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 down. Same thing. If I want to just go, if I want to go all the way to the right, I could do Control right, and then it takes me to there. Again, not what I want. And so more practice, I'll go back to school, and I'll do Control Shift down to highlight, and then Control Shift right. And it goes all the way to the far right. Now I can copy all this and move it or send it to someone. Let's say I didn't want the last column. So let's say for some reason my boss didn't want the transfers and total operating expenses. Well, I could hold shift instead of control, right? Shift goes one by one. Control goes by as far as you can go to the bounds or a blank. So I'm just going to hold shift and then left arrow key, left arrow key, left arrow key. So it's just one column at a time. Right? You can do all sorts of combos of this. So let's say I only wanted column D, G, and H. Well, I could click on D, and then to multi-select, I can hold Control, right? And I can hit G, and then hold Control or Command again, and click H. And now I only have those three selected. So I could then copy, so Control or Command C, or right click, copy, and then I'll create a new sheet. And if I want to paste, I can do right click, paste, or Control V. And it only takes those three. Same thing in terms of I could select more if I wanted. So I could then, if I knew I wanted to just go one right, just do shift right, or shift left if I didn't want that one, and then copy again. Oops, you're not allowed to do multiple sections. So let's see, I'll do Control Shift down, then just Shift right, something like that. Again, notice that it stopped at a blank, so we want to be very careful whenever we're doing this. But if anything, Control can, if you just do Control and up arrow key a few times, it's a quick way to get up to the top of your data, which is really, really nice. I've already kind of talked a little bit about these, but we can kind of do another one here. So I'm going to talk about cut, copy, and paste. And I want to talk about words and formulas. So if you don't have any formulas, it's easy, right? If you want a whole column, just, let's see, I'm going to go to, I'll stick with these because I'll take the school. I'll click on the whole column B. Again, cursor changes to the black arrow. And then I, again, have gotten comfortable with the keyboard shortcuts. So for a Mac, Command C. For a PC, Control C. And you'll know that because the little things have gone through. Note, Excel can get a little finicky. Let's say you get distracted, and I'm going to create, let's go back to sheet 2 here. Now let's go to a new sheet. And if for some reason I started typing in here, like, hello, my brain got a little bit off, note, I'll go back to that expenses, and it's not there. So if I tried to paste, so let me go to sheet 3, it's going to be like, there's nothing to paste, Gray. Like, there's nothing there. And so if you do anything between when you copy and paste, it stops. So again, I'm highlighted here. I'm going to do Control C. You can also right click, copy. Technically up here in the Home tab, you have copy, you have cut, same thing, or similar. And then you'll go to whatever sheet you want it. And then I know it's a whole column, so I'll click on column A. And I like the keyboard shortcut again, Control V. And I think that makes it a lot easier. But there are other options. You can do right click and then paste options. And if it's a word, just paste works. You could also do the paste feature up here in the top left, and it does the same thing. Where things get a little bit more difficult is if you have a formula in there. So if I went back to school sports and that one we created earlier, not school sports, expenses, and I go to that let's see, why is it not going to expenses? That very last column where, let's do revenue, sorry. This is the one we created, that percent royalties. Remember, there's that formula in here. So if I were to just click on column Q, copy, and no, you can do this for individual cells as well. I'm typically moving around a lot of columns. And I go back to sheet 3, and then let's say I go to column B and I paste. Oh, what happened? Well, when you have formulas in there, it's trying to bring the formula over. And so it's trying to just write the exact same formula, like divide the first one by the second, which it doesn't even have because you didn't do it right. So like if I did, so let's say I'm going to undo. Undo up here is a button. I'll show you the keyboard shortcut. But here, if I put it in C and I just did paste, note it's like, well, you're trying to take a word and divide it by a letter. You're like, well, that's not what I want. And so again, I'll hit escape. And Excel's giving me a warning. It's like something's wrong, which it's not super instructive outside of like you've messed up, but it's better than nothing. How to get around that, because we will want that. what I typically do is, one, if I already know I'm never going to use this formula again, I will copy it and then I'll paste the number right on top of it. Sometimes you need dynamic worksheets though that like are linking one another. And so an option is to copy. So again, Control or Command C or one of the three other options. Go to that sheet or that you want it, and then right click, and then you have these paste options. So it gives you little previews. So paste will give me a reference error. That's not what I want. The 1, 2, 3 is values. There, it's just moving the values over, so it's not using the formula. You also have some other options where like transpose. We'll cover things like that in later videos where you can go from like horizontal to vertical, which is really nice. But a lot of these are more advanced than we need for now. But I just want the values. And so I'm going to rename this. So sheet 3, because we're working a little bit, I'm going to rename. We'll do intro tutorial number 2, just because I like to keep things organized, and you can click and drag these whatever order. You see a little black arrow pop up, and so I'll move it over here. And so you always want to be careful when you have a worksheet with has like cells when you're pasting and copying things. The only difference from cut is, so when you copy things, hopefully this makes sense, the original stays there. If I wanted to cut this, so if I wanted to get rid of it, this sheet, you can right click and cut. I've learned that it's Control or Command X, depending on the computer type, and it looks the same. And then I'll put it over here, and if I right click and paste, note it only gives you the values because it actually keeps where you're referencing it from. So if you look in this formula bar, I'll double click, it's saying revenue, which is weird, but notice down here it matches that sheet. So it's saying on the revenue sheet, right, it's referencing O2, and then on the revenue sheet, P2. And so it's still linked. But you'll notice when you go back there that it's not there. So last thing for keyboard shortcuts, or actually just general maneuvering, undo. So most people are going to have it up here, and it just undoes what they've done, and so it puts it back over here, which is fine. But if you learn the keyboard shortcut, probably if you take anything away from this video, I hope it's this, is undo and redo. They work across almost every program, even if there isn't an undo button. So I work a lot in Tableau where it's actually kind of hard to undo things because it doesn't have the button. It's hard to redo things. And so I highly recommend, instead of just doing up here, undo, redo, like yours might not even have it. You can actually customize this thing to have a bunch of different other things on it, but depending on what you use a lot. But again, we'll talk about that more in advanced videos. But the two biggest things you can learn are Control or Command Z, which is undo, and then Control or Command Y. So Control, again, is for the PCs. Command is for the Mac. And it is just so much easier if you make a mistake. So I'll go to this intro tutorial, and let's say for some reason I accidentally delete this and this and this and this, and you're like, oh, I don't want to do that. And so again, you can do the undo feature, but again, this is one of the few keyboard shortcuts you have to know, because it also works across like Google Sheets, Google Slides, all that. So just Control Z, Control Z, Control Z, Control Z, or Command Z. And then the opposite is Command Z or Control Z, where it's redo. So I'm technically redoing my deletes, right? So those two things are absolutely huge. I highly recommend getting really comfortable. So I'm going to undo, 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 so it's a little bit nicer for us, because it's so nice when like you accidentally delete part of an email that you spent an hour writing, and you're like, I can't find the undo feature. If you use the keyboard shortcut, it almost always works, and it's really, really nice. Okay, the last thing we'll talk about, and it shouldn't take too long, is just basic formatting of things. So any sort of formatting is going to be on the Home tab and typically under the font. And if you've worked with the other Microsoft programs, it's almost the same outside of sort of some small tweaks. So number one, anytime you've sort of selected anything, you can always change the font. There's literally thousands of different options, and most of the time it'll let you preview it. You can change the size. you've got the manual, like, so maybe you want to bold your titles, so I would bold them, something like that. You also have some alignment things. I typically like them centered, so like these alignments are the centering left, right, and then you actually have within a cell. So like, let's say I had a really wide cell, and I first want them centered, and it's currently on the bottom. Well, maybe I want them in the middle of that cell, so it looks a little bit nicer. And so the alignment is really nice. You can italicize things. You can underline things. It's up to you in terms of aesthetically what you like. So like I might do something like this, and I'll double click to format it. I don't love when the titles are centered and the numbers aren't, so I can select the whole columns and say, please center these for me, which is really nice. Some people like them, some people don't. The keyboard shortcuts should highlight as you kind of hover over them. So I know that these make the most intuitive sense. Control, or again, Command B. I use, so like, let's say I'm going to highlight these and then I unbold. So Control B, Control U, Control I, got rid of them all. So I might just like Control B, Control I, or again, Command it if you're on a Mac, just to make it look a little bit easier, which is really nice. Some people don't love the underline, myself included, where it's just the word. And so I can highlight these. Another nice thing is borders. So this right here are a bunch of different border options. The bottom border, I think, is the stock one. So I made the mistake of note that I was clicked on the cell, so it put the border there. So undo, Control Z. And then I'll hover over these two and highlight, click and drag. And then if I just click there, it'll put a bottom border. Maybe I want a border around the whole table, so I can highlight these. And then if you click the drop down, I like thick outside borders. All right, so it makes like a big line. And I'll, let's see, I'm going to right click insert and then right click insert, so you can kind of see it a little bit better, like what it does. So a lot of this you get to play around. It might be like personal preference. I've seen a lot of like in research journals and things like that. They'll do like top and bottom. So you got to be careful where you've highlighted. So maybe here, and then when you're doing top and bottom, it's just the very top and the very bottom, double bottom border. So I'll double click, and now you have a double bottom there, which is really nice. It can get clunky if you start moving stuff around. So this you just spend a little bit of time with. I typically like the thick outside borders. And if you're a creative person, you can go through, like you can change the line color to, I don't know, like let's do Eller colors. We'll do the dark red outline. And I am colored efficient, which, see, I was highlighted on there instead of where I was supposed to be highlighting. So I'm going to do some undoing. And then it's got something where I can draw the line. So like here, and like I'm holding click and drag, something like that. Again, that's probably more advanced or more than anyone needs, but you can change the line type, things like that. Again, some people are like, I can't get rid of the cursor, and it happens to me all the time. So just hit escape, and it takes things back to normal. And then I'll do Control or Command Z to undo those things. You can do fill. So again, if you've watched the word and stuff like that, it should be pretty straightforward. But let's say you want it to pop a little bit more. So you could do highlighting. I despise this neon yellow, and yellow is actually my favorite color. And so what I typically do is something a little more pleasing, but you have a whole range of colors. Like, again, however creative you want to be, if you want a standard one or a custom one, or if your company, if you know what their colors are, you can type in the red, green, blue numbers, and it'll do it for you. So I like just generally maybe something like this, like a navy blue with the white. And then I think this table looks a little bit nicer. And again, I think the red actually looks terrible now that I sit here and do it. And so I've put it, it's still red, so I'll do that. And then I'm going to change the line color to black, and hopefully, I gotta highlight where I want it. And then I'll do escape. And then I'll do my thick border, something like that. So again, it's up to you all. There's more advanced things, use of colors, like conditional formatting. That's really nice. That can be used to make life a little bit easier. Let's see. Last thing we're going to talk about will be the number formats. So I'm going to go to this intro tutorial 2 here. I'm going to go bring something else from the revenue sheet over. So I'll bring these two. So royalty and licensing. Actually, I'll also bring the year over. So control and then click, or command and then click. And now I've got all three. So I'm going to copy. I'll go here just so we can see it a little bit easier, and do this. And so a couple things, I'll zoom in. So let's see, I'll do maybe here. I know that these are both numeric. And so if you want to, again, make things look clean and nice, under this number tab, it's got a bunch of presettings where if you just click on the accounting format, it sets it up as accounting format. I'm not an accountant. I don't do a lot of accounting, so I don't love that the dollar sign's over there. An alternative would use the drop down and tell it, instead of accounting, let's do it as a currency. And then it kind of presents it sort of however we want it, or how I typically like to see it, which is really, really nice. And as long as you know that, note that there is a date feature. So for year, you're tempted to be like, ooh, I can present this as a date. Note that for the date, it needs month, day, year. And I'll show you. If you did short date, it somehow changes the year to 1905. So Control Z. Even if you tried to do long date, like June 26, 1905, that's not true. So again, it needs month, day, year. It does actually have a time feature if you have time data, which is pretty cool throughout the day. It can format it really nice. The other one that I kind of use a lot of is percentages. So I want this displayed nicely as a percentage, because technically this is 0.5% or 10% or 8.7. And I could manually make it, but then I don't have the percentage signs. And note, when you do these, it doesn't impact like math or formulas that like reference them. And so I'm gonna bold this, and then for this, it's a percentage. Well, there's actually a percentage option, and it actually has the keyboard shortcut. If you kind of look at it, it doesn't look like there is one for accounting, but you could do Control-Shift% or probably Command-Shift for a Mac. But I'll typically do the drop down and then do percentage, and now it displays it as a percentage. Note, it just arbitrarily chooses, I think, 2 decimals to show. If you want to show more than that, that's easy. So again, select whatever column you want, and then over here, right, you should have this increased decimal, which isn't what we, or maybe is what we want, where it'll move the decimal to the left, right? So maybe your boss wants really, really detailed, or maybe they want to the whole percentage. All right, so the left goes to increase the decimals, the right goes to decrease them, and it rounds. Note that even though it rounds, if you were to click on one of these cells, notice up here in the formula bar, it still has the real number. So if you're doing calculations, it's not going to adjust. And it's going to use this full number instead of the 1% or the 10%, which is really, really nice. And so I definitely recommend kind of taking advantage of that. Again, whenever we're dealing with, like, let's say it looks like millions of dollars here, I might highlight across both of these and say, I don't really want to see the zeros because I don't need them. It really just depends on like what project you're working on or what your boss wants, things like that. Maybe the last thing I'll show you is wrapping text. So like if you're like, this really doesn't need to be this long, but I still want to see everything, you can manually go and like format it. It's like, all right, I want it to look like this and maybe like this. And then a way to fit this, you can still kind of read it. And again, this is personal preference. You can do wrap text where it wraps. Usually if it's different words, they'll stay together. So like for revenue from royalties, if I then wrap the text, it'll keep them together. But since it has it like this, with the underscores, it doesn't do it very well. But it is a way to kind of make it so like the columns aren't insanely wide for a lot of these, and then you can kind of figure out like what works best for you. So I might do something like this, and I honestly would probably change the words, and then I would format it, and then to be consistent, let's see, I probably capitalize this. I might do column, just practicing what we learned. Fill, text, and then maybe italics, something like that. Completely up to you. I hope this was helpful. Again, hopefully you just kind of go through and you can practice on these. If you go to the next video, it's going to start from the start. So like You won't need these things for the other one. But yeah, that's it. If you want to learn more about this data, there is the data overview and things like that about where this data is from. So we're always making sure that we're referencing things. We got this from Kaggle. But it is nice to have something like this, especially if you're going to send this to someone, like gives them an overview of what the data is and what might be important and what might not be. Yeah, I hope this was helpful and have a great day.